I've been asked to summarize the history of a journey from being an oil man, essentially, starting out in my 40-year career, to being a rewilder in the Highlands of Scotland. And it spans 5 themes, 5 phases, starting off with being a geologist on the faculty at the Royal School of Mines and very much a creature of the fossil fuel industries. At that time, I was worried about nuclear weapons proliferation and got involved with other scientists at Imperial College in arms control. I founded an organization called the Verification Technology Information Center. I started working on climate full-time in 1989, and that's continued through to the present. I'll talk about that a bit. And then in 1996, as an activity within climate change activism, I founded a solar company and worked on solar energy through to 2020. Since then, I've been undertaking nature recovery in the Highlands. So what links all this together? I think there is a clear theme. I feel there's a clear theme, and that is I've been in rebellion against the idea of the human species frankly committing suicide, and as I see it, and that spans the arms control phase, an existential threat, of course, if nuclear weapons are used on any scale, climate change, another existential threat if we allow climate meltdown to run its course, and then nature recovery. Unless we stop biodiversity collapse, we can forget about everything else because nothing else will matter. So that's been the theme. I just hate the idea that we're stupid enough collectively to do this to our home. So let me go through the phases one by one, starting with Earth history. That ship is the Glomar Challenger. It's a scientific drill ship, and my research was on the history of the oceans. That's what got me interested, worried about climate change, and but I was very much an oil man. I mean, the Royal School of Mines was one of the great training houses for the cannon fodder for the fossil fuel industries. And here I am in 1983 exploring for oil in Baluchistan, a province of western Pakistan, south of Afghanistan and east of Iran, with my co-workers and our tribal guards. They had single action Lee Enfield rifles, the people they were protecting us from, heroin smugglers bringing poppy seeds down from Afghanistan to the coast for shipping to the west. They, of course, had Kalashnikovs. In the second field season, we weren't using Toyota Land Cruisers anymore. We were using camels far from the beaten track. And so many stories to tell here, but a near-death experience. One of my colleagues who had been to this kind of area before had said, whatever you do, don't camp in the wadis. What he didn't say was don't camp on a gravel terrace perched high above the wadi. And a biblical flash flood came down the wadi and the gravel terrace, and I survived that by the skin of my teeth to tell this story today. A weather-related event, and that was before there were major concerns about climate change. My research was on shale. I was funded by BP and Shell, and very much part of that world. I would speak to chief geologists in the staff room at the Royal School of Mines, quite faint with admiration. 30 years on, little did I imagine that shale would not be a source rock as we thought it then, but also a reservoir rock with the advent of fracking. And here you see the front cover of Time magazine 2011. This rock could power the world. You both cook oil and gas out of it, and it can act as home for that oil and gas until the oil companies pull it out of the ground. This is 2011, long after we had reason to be worried about climate change, but no mention of it whatsoever. No mention that this rock could cook the world. And for me, it's always been pretty simple. These are the figures from 1990 when I started the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change figures. There were 750 gigatons of carbon in the atmosphere. It's more now, of course. And there were up to 10,000 gigatons of carbon in fossil fuels. And there's the Earth's thin atmosphere, and you think to yourself, this is not going to work. This is going to end in tears. You don't need to be a scientist to work that out. Surely it's a radiatively active gas, and it's also produced in parallel with methane, another radiatively active gas. It's going to heat up the atmosphere and turn things into a state of turmoil, and we are going to risk cooking our home. It really seemed simple to me. Sadly, it is not seen as simple by other people. And snapshot of how 2016, there I am debating in front of the grandees of the pension fund industry with Tony Hayward, former chief executive of BP. And we were students together. He had long, dark, curly hair. I had long, fair, curly hair. Look at us now. And Tony is there, is trying to persuade the grandees and having a fairly easy time in his urbane way, that it's fine to burn gas as much as you like. It's fine to burn oil, and indeed it's fine to burn coal, because of course he's chairman of Glencore at this point. I am sitting there breaking the world blood pressure record. More on climate change later. Let me deviate for a minute before I get to climate change. This is Stan Petrov, rather an important man in the history of the world. On the 26th of September 1983, you might want to try and recall where you were on that day, if you're more than 42 years old. Stan was in charge of all the Soviet intercontinental ballistic missiles, and his standing instructions from the Kremlin were fire the damn things if you see the alarms go off, because the communications between his bunkered headquarters and the Kremlin were pretty rubbish. And all the alarms duly went off that day in 1983. Stan looked at all the flashing lights showing the intercontinental ballistic missiles of America descending on the Soviet Union, and decided not to press the button. And he told his screaming crew, no doubt, that it was an electrical fault and would clear up in a minute. He had no idea, of course. He just wasn't prepared to press the button. And so we survived to fight and live another day. And the point is that people say nuclear weapons have kept the peace for 40 years. It's rubbish. We have survived by the skin of our teeth for 40 years with these terrible things on the planet. And a report by the Royal Institution for International Affairs made the point very clearly in 2014. It lists 13 instances since 1962 when nuclear weapons were nearly launched. And the record shows that individual decision-making, often in disobedience of protocol and political guidance like Stan's, has on several occasions saved the day. Stan narrowly survived being executed for his failure to do his duty, but thank God he wasn't. So when I started working on arms control, I didn't know any of this. I suspected it, of course, because at that point we had intermediate nuclear missiles traveling around the lanes of Berkshire, and the Soviets had the equivalent in East Germany. And why? Because the militarists were scared of nuclear first strike. And so I started working with a group of scientists to, make the case that you could verify getting rid of these missiles. You could do all sorts of techie things using satellites, seismology, on-site inspections as well, and it would be possible. And so I was joined by scientists at Imperial College. This is where I cut my teeth on raising large sums of money. Quaker Foundations funded this work, and it was a business for Imperial College because as the arms control agreements began to roll out, we ran short courses for Defence Ministry and Foreign Ministry officials from all over the world, and the university made quite a lot of money out of it. I, for my part, was backwards and forwards to the Soviet Union in those years, talking to Soviet counterparts in the Soviet Academy of Sciences. And ultimately there was a treaty, an intermediate nuclear forces treaty. Gorbachev really wanted to get rid of all nuclear weapons. I'm convinced of that. And he was unlucky to run up against Ronald Reagan. I think if he'd had Obama, it might have been a different story. But in any event, there's so many stories from these years, and let me just recount two quickly. Roel Sagdeev, Gorbachev's scientific advisor, came to talk to a short course that I had organized with my contemporary at the Moscow Physics Technical Institute. And that was a sort of equivalent of Imperial College in Moscow. And we had Russian students and Western students together to hear about all the arms control issues. Sagdeev got onto the stage, and he was head of the Soviet space program as well. And he said, I am going to tell you young people about, in the next 45 minutes, about the military-industrial complex. And I thought, oh no, just a propaganda talk. We all know about the Western military-industrial complex. And he said, not the Western one, the Soviet one. And he then went on to describe the pretty much exact equivalent of this monstrous lobby that makes money out of an arms race existing in the Soviet Union the same as it did in the West. And those students watched history that day. Yeah. We collectively missed out big time in those years because, yes, there was a treaty, but it wasn't enough. Many nuclear warheads remained. They still do today, and today it's even worse because they're hypersonic, many of them, whereas the missiles of that era took many minutes to get to their targets. The Berlin Wall came down, but we didn't get rid of the nuclear weapons or even really seriously negotiate them down. And that threat remains. And it's a threat that we have to find a way to get around because of the risk of accidental use. And also, there's a peace dividend here. The world spends currently $2.2 trillion on weaponry, did in 2024, and a lot of that, much of that, is for nuclear weapons, which can never be used. So what are we doing? We need a common security regime where we can negotiate these things down and benefit from the peace dividend. Just a fraction of that $2.7 trillion. Imagine what we could do solving some of the other problems, including, of course, climate change. So let me say a bit about climate change. A big theme all the way through has been the financial sector for me, and I worked a lot on insurance in particular. And here you see a book that I edited in 1996, published by a German insurance company, Gerling, the Gerling Group. I thought then that we were really making some progress, and that this industry could start turning off the capital taps on fossil fuels. That's really what had to happen, what has to happen, if we're going to move to a clean energy future. It hasn't happened anywhere near as fast as I would like, and the problem has just grown and grown. When I started working on climate change in 1989, there were 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and the global average temperature in the left-hand column, in the left-hand axis, was just over 0.3 degrees Celsius. Today, fast forward, and we're up well in excess of 420 parts per million of carbon dioxide, and heading for well over 1.2 degrees Celsius. And look at how high the average temperatures were in the 2 years of complete records, 24 and 23. So if you're in the tribe of people who wishes to dismiss this as a hoax, good luck trying to prove that in a court of law, because some good few people are going to have to prove it, try to, in courts of law, as a result of a ruling from the 15 judges of the International Court of Justice on the 23rd of July 2025, saying that governments and corporations choosing not to act meaningfully on the 1.5 degrees Celsius global warming target or aspiration of the Paris Climate Treaty would and should face court action. And you can be sure that all over the world right now, many cases are being prepared against those who are refusing to act, governmental and corporate organizations. And these cases will not be thrown out of court. This was a victory for a group of students from the Pacific Islands who took on the campaign of persuading the International Court of Justice and won. Back in 1989, it was possible to be a right-wing politician and believe that climate change is a problem. And here's Mrs. Thatcher. She was the first global leader to really take this issue seriously. And in many ways, the climate negotiations that started in 1990, involving almost all the governments on the planet, were kicked off because of the stance she took. And here's a quote from her speech at the UN General Assembly. And I saw her in action in a press conference after the very first Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report, really saying exactly what needed to be done to deal with climate change. And the negotiations have been going on ever since, and I describe my front seat view of them in 2 books, in particular, The Carbon War and The Winning of the Carbon War. Lots of stories to tell, but let me pick a few out on the way through the journey. Starting with the treaties, the Climate Convention itself was agreed in 1992 at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. And here you see a school photo of all the world leaders. This was in the days before the security that we've had to deal with after 9/11. And there they all are, George Bush and Castro circled, and a closer picture of the two with Robert Mugabe behind Bush. And notice at the edge of the top picture that there are lots of people in that room as well as the world leaders. I was in that room. I saw that school photo being taken. Remarkable times in the world. The treaty had no teeth, but it was a start at the Rio Earth Summit. It was given teeth, blunt ones, however, at the Kyoto Climate Summit of 1997. And this summit was the subject of a play that was recently on in London, staged by the Royal Shakespeare Corporation. Not just any play. It got 5-star reviews, wall to wall. Some of you may have seen it, and it summarizes in particular the dramatic final night when there really was a setback for the fossil fuel industries. I saw that too, described it in my book. The book is acknowledged in the program of the play, and my goodness me, it was a drama in real life, and I commend that if you're looking for a Christmas read. But almost in 2015, the Paris Climate Agreement did give teeth to the Climate Convention. That was where the 1.5 degree ceiling was agreed. And the other treaty that's really material to our survivability is the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Treaty of 2022, where most of the world's governments agreed the ambitious but essential target of stopping and reversing the collapse of biodiversity. So what was it like working for Greenpeace? This was then one of the most radical environment groups in the world, but my experience of it was not to do with rubber boots and non-violent direct actions. I had to go to the climate negotiations as part of the lobbying team. And my boss on through that period on the right there was the Australian High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, and he quit the Australian Foreign Service to join Greenpeace. And his motivation for rebelling against extinction really was the ozone hole, and waking up to find that his daughters couldn't play in the sun in their Australian backyard. And you see two other Greenpeace lobbyists from Japan and New Zealand, and this was the type of team we had. The small islands states were promised a summit of their own after the Earth Summit 2 years later, and the world leaders said they'd all turn up. Well, they didn't, of course. Only the leaders of the small island states turned up. We were all on the Rainbow Warrior, a team of 14 from 14 different nations. That's what it was like working for Greenpeace. And here you see one of them accepting the invitation to come and visit the ship, talking to our head of delegation, a lovely Brazilian lady called Anna Tony. And I watched her offer Fidel Castro a glass of orange juice. It was a hot day and he was wearing his ridiculous military uniform. This was before Desmond Tutu told him to stop wearing that and wear a suit like the rest of us, which he subsequently did. Anyway, Anna Tony offered him the orange juice, and he looked at the orange juice, looked at her, raised an eyebrow. This was at a time, of course, when the CIA had tried to assassinate him many times. And Anna got the message, took a sip of the orange juice, whereupon Castro grabbed it and slugged it down very rapidly. A very interesting little scene. And we were doing quite well for a while. In 2000, BP endeavoured to rebrand as Beyond Petroleum, and I saw this close too. They used to trust me. I'd be invited into behind closed doors sessions while it was all being nutted out. And, you know, in 25 years, we've never heard of a solar crisis. Good line. Bringing solar to over 160 countries. Thank you very much. Now, this wasn't just one advert in The Guardian or something. This was in airports all over the world. I saw these kinds of adverts in 2000. I was more than encouraged, you can well imagine. Didn't last, of course. Exxon Unleashed, 2001. How the world's most powerful corporation plans to dominate the new age of oil exploration. No mention of a cooked planet. And, BP has to join in. Poor old John Brown had to throw in the towel. And the financial services industry had a lot to do with this. The high Exxon share price was a reward from investors. The low BP share price that did for the effort to pivot was obviously the opinion or collectively of the financial services industry. So it's not just the oil and gas industry, it's a problem. It's the financial services industry as well. But that was 2001. We mustn't give up. We must keep going. It's not just business, of course, as well. It's the what is done to defend the rearguard action, to try and talk down the invaders, the disruptors. And here you see the front page of Daily Mail, a typical planted story by some of the biggest PR agencies in the world. They've been doing this all the way through. They still are doing it today. Wind turbine with a fire in its gearbox. Big deal. What a shocking, horrible story. Threat to life. Front page news. And it's not controversial to say this. There's so much evidence for what goes on. And much of it is confessional. And in my own case, I was taken out for a drink by a very senior executive in one of these PR agencies. And He said, I want you to know that they're using black arts to try and kill you. He didn't mean literally, I hope, but he meant kill the side of the false debate that his company and other PR agencies were being paid by big oil to wage against the insurgents. And of course, they've been helped by politicians all too often. And on the right here, you see another front page and a national leader blaming the problem of soaring energy prices on the solution, green technologies, a false meme, and these kinds of things have become so common these days that many of us refer to the world we live in as a post-truth world. I focused on insurance from 1993. I gave a talk to Lloyd's of London that year, having interviewed a good few senior figures in the industry, and found real fears for the future of stable insurance markets and a dearth, of course, of action to cut off the risk at source, which would have been investing in fossil fuels. So that was 1993. For a while, it looked as though there might be some traction. I was invited to, for example, talk to the chief executives and chairs of all of America's reinsurance companies. That was quite an experience. But those of us working on this issue really didn't have anything like as much success as we would have liked. Fast forward through all those years of soaring global average temperature shown in the diagram, and you see Howden, probably the insurance company or brokerage with the best record on arguing for action on climate risk and resilience, saying, the insurance is now a gating issue for capital. If an asset or operation is uninsurable, it's likely to be uninvestable. Insurance is no longer just about a protection, it's a barometer of climate readiness and long-term asset value. So some progress now, but why has it taken so long to get there? One argument that has done rather well over the years is the carbon tracker argument about unburnable carbon. Basically, a group of maverick financial analysts, I was chair of this organization, watched it close to, have argued that there's a bubble in the energy markets because you can't burn more than a tiny fraction of the fossil fuels that are proven underground, and the unburnable portion is counted as assets on balance sheets and shouldn't be. Anyway, that came out in 2011 and initially didn't go down too well. I remember a meeting at the Bank of England in 2013 with senior officials saying, we don't agree with you, carbon tracker. By 2015, they certainly did. And the then governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, who you see there at the Paris Climate Summit with Michael Bloomberg, was a big advocate of the carbon tracker thesis. And that thesis has had an impact. I think if you look at the patterns of investment today, since 2015, you can see all the fossil fuels going down. Oil, gas and coal. These are sunset industries. They're just not dying off quickly enough. And the replacements, the insurgents, the $2.2 trillion invested last year in renewables, grids and storage, energy efficiency and electrification. This is the future. This is what can save the planet. But that investment's not going fast enough, and the fossil fuel investment needs to go down faster. And it can, going forward. We must keep trying on that theme. So then to solar energy, which I started out on in 1996 and set up a company, Solar Century, in 2000, essentially as a proper business in that year. It struggled at first, but then took off like a rocket in parallel with the global market. We helped create it, and that was due to the collapsing solar cost due to manufacturing at scale that you see in the blue line on the graph. So some snapshots from this. The first UK solar roof home with solar shingles. I lived in that, and we generated more electricity in a year from that roof than we used. And by 2006, we had a really good product, the C21, the dark solar electric roof tile and the pale solar thermal one, so combined heat and power in the roof. And these were essentially well on the way to being zero carbon homes. We also did building integrated architectural solar. This building was very beautiful, but a shame about the gross margin. We didn't do any more than one of those. But putting solar on the roofs of factories and warehouses, that was a much better form of business. But the roof tiles were the thing that was doing so well, and they were real tiles. They went straight on the battens, as you see there. We had a wonderful pilot with SSE housing their staff in Slough. Solar Thermal did all the hot water, 100% of the electricity from our tiles, excess solar for battery charging in an electric vehicle. And you could smell the future in this. You could really feel it coming. And we had Silicon Valley investors. So here's our roof tile co-marketing with an electric car company, a little company called Tesla, with its first product that our roof tiles were supposed to be powering. Same in Silicon Valley investors. And I had the occasion of a massive ego trip in that Tesla asked me to do the first road drive of their Roadster in the UK. I drove it from London to Oxford, couldn't resist stopping in a BP filling station along the way. I had a journalist from the Daily Mail in the jump seat. And things were looking really good at that time. We were the fastest growing UK energy company. We won a Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation in 2011. And the market making mechanism that the government brought in was working. The feed-in tariffs were helping us manufacture. The tariffs were going down every year. Our manufacturing cost was going down. We had an ethical gross margin for the product. What's not to like? Well, and also, you see us in the Financial Times touted as perhaps one of the candidates as a game-changing green Google. That this is a roof of a chalet in the French Pyrenees, and there's the climate change minister of the day in 2010 signing one of our tiles at a sales event. But the next year came austerity and the feed-in tariff cut. And how sad was this? 25,000 jobs at risk because George Osborne walked into the Secretary of State for Energy's office one day, Chris Huhne, and said, "You can have wind or you can have solar, you can't have both. We're going to cut one of them." Huhne chose wind, and so they cut the feed-in tariff for solar by 80% plus with 6 weeks notice. That's 6 weeks in which it takes to ship modules from China to Britain. So an entire industry intended for the chop. And here are the good folk of Solar Century protesting appropriately with their green hats. The Greenpeace years came in useful. I knew how to do this kind of thing. So here are some people from the construction industry, all actually working at Solar Century, delivering a petition to number 10 Downing Street, wearing our green collars. And we took the government to court. And we won in the High Court. They took us to the Court of Appeal. We won there as well. And then the government took us to the Supreme Court, along with all the drug dealers and murderers and everything else. And fortunately, three high Supreme Court judges told the government to go get a life and kick the case out. But it was a Pyrrhic victory, and tens of thousands of jobs did go. Not ours, because we were well cashed up then and were able to exploit the renewable obligation certificates because the cost of solar had come down so much. But we got no quarter from the government on conditions for employment. For deployment, we were sort of forced by the annual timetable to install during the winter, which is ridiculous. And this is a field in Oxfordshire that looks like a First World War battlefield. It's not. It's a solar century installation going in, and there it is, complete in the summer. And it's my second favourite installation because it's in David Cameron's constituency. 2014, the longest solar bridge in the world, installed over a working railway and a working river. We had some seriously good engineers at that time. And another massive installation on a factory, a working factory, the Bentley car factory. We were fighting on. A few thoughts about leadership. If you're an entrepreneur, it's a rare thing for you to be able to run a fast-growing company that you've started. And I was very fortunate in this regard. I had two chief executives who took over from me, who were both world-class managers and leaders. Derry Newman, former managing director of Sony on the left there, did the job for 5 years, and then Frans van den Heuvel, a Dutch solar pioneer, did the job right through to 2020. Culture. We evolved an interesting culture at Solar Century. Much of it was rooted in the creation of a charity of our own design using 5% of our net profit. Most of our venture capitalists hated the fact that we wouldn't take their money unless they signed up for this, but we were of the view that we should help Africa out by empowering solar micro entrepreneurs to sell solar lights. And the aim was and is to replace kerosene. And here you see a kerosene lantern, hideously expensive, and giving a useless light and contaminating the atmosphere in African homes. Solar, just a few dollars for one of those. It would last 5 years, perfectly clean air, much better light. No brainer, microcosm of the replacement of fossil fuels. And this is what we did. And again, we experienced exponential growth. For a while, we were the single biggest retailer of solar lighting in Africa. We catalyzed the first two proper solar markets in Tanzania and Kenya. And the charity lives on in Malawi and Zambia. And in Malawi now is solarizing whole villages. And this was very popular with the staff. They identified, a lot of them, with this, and it enabled us to have stickier staff. They lasted with us longer than most staff lasted with our competitors. Here you see a running team, a cycling team, raising funds for the charity, and sport generally was very important in the company. And we'd become very international. You can imagine by the time Brexit arrived, we had many nationalities working for us, and Brexit was not very popular in Solar Century. Here you see a marketing department output on the day of Brexit protest in the United Kingdom. Partying was very important. If you work hard, you have to play hard. We had a salsa club that worked very well. We had fancy dress themes for Christmas parties. Here you see the winners of the prizes for individual and group at the party that was that had the theme of London tube stations. The gentleman on the left is, of course, Turnham Green. He had a spray can of green foam. He used to work for BP. And never to be forgotten on the right, the Seven Sisters. We went to charity events, and we took a table out at one where we were next to the Rolling Stones. And one of our number thought it would be cool to ask Mick Jagger for a dance, which she did, and he said yes, and there they are showing off their moves. Halfway through the number, she said something to him. He turned on his heel and left the dance floor. She came back looking shocked. I said, "What did you say to him?" Dreading to hear the answer. She said, "All I did was say that my parents were his biggest fans." So in this culture, that we had 6 intra-company marriages. And I used to console myself with the thought, and sometimes verbalize it, that, if we failed as a solar company, and we did have 2 near-death experiences, at least we would have succeeded as a dating agency. But we did succeed in a business. We were acquired by Statkraft in 2020, and 200 solar centurions went off into Statkraft with that DNA, which was something to be very happy about. I think I was lucky that an oil company didn't acquire Solar Century. That wouldn't have made me anything like as pleased with the ultimate outcome. And so we get to the present day. I'm now in the Highlands of Scotland with another company I've created, Highlands Rewilding, and we're basically doing nature recovery, and this is an example of the kind of thing we're doing. On land we manage on the right, you can see remnants of temperate rainforest, and on the left is a nature reserve that is the Full Monty, a rainforest peninsula. We're going to repeat that on the right hand side of the water in desolate terrain, denuded by mostly deer and sheep grazing. Nature recovery at work, carbon sequestration and biodiversity uplift. And we're using a great array, a full array of technologies and techniques to do this. And we have a very good science team in the field and 4 partnerships with landowners. This is our model. We call them Osprey partnerships, operating system partnerships for rewilding, where we do all the nature recovery for the landowner and share the proceeds on a win-win basis. That's Highlands Rewilding for you. And this includes forestry. Here you see an area that we have felled, taken the timber off to the sawmills, and the timber should never have been there. In that particular case, you see the peat bog at the top of the picture. That was timber planted on peat, which is not a good idea in terms of carbon sequestration or biodiversity either. And so going forward, I have a dream of marrying the nature recovery with commercial forestry that is sustainable, not done on peat and that sort of thing. And the carbon goes off into timber buildings, because that is genuine carbon capture and storage. 1 ton of carbon dioxide will lock up in a cubic meter of dried timber. And I and a few other Solar Century investors have invested in one of Scotland's pioneering timber manufacturing companies. And so that's another angle going forward where hopefully a contribution can be made to stop these suicidal tendencies that we seem to have as a species of cooking our own home and destroying the biodiversity on that home. Both existential threats that we must overcome if we are to have a livable future. Thank you for listening.